Are you tired of hearing people complain about the world and ready to own the responsibility to make the world a better place? Hey, my name is Brent Simpson, and welcome to this episode of Creating the Future. I believe that within each of us is a yearning to make the world a better place. So let's work together and make that desire a reality. My hope is that today's conversation inspires you as you endeavor to create the future. I do want to apologize right off the bat. So if you've been around for a long time, I'm a person that speaks with notes, and they keep my butterfly brain in line. I purposely didn't have much notes. I did write some stuff down and stuck it in the Bible, but it's really, I just want to tell a story. And when you tell a story, you don't always need notes. And I want to make some biblical applications and just share. So I run at a high speed. Somebody jokingly said something about it a few minutes ago in here when we were just kind of walking around and talking, but I run at a speed that's not always normal, and it's usually not healthy. And when we came to Brandon Assembly of God 12 years ago, and God started to move, it went from one service to 2 to 3 to 4 to once a month we were doing 5. And running at that speed is just not healthy. And God's doing amazing things. Oftentimes, y'all should know this. If you ever see a church that's just exploding, especially in what they call momentum growth phase, where it's just growing, they can't tell you why. It oftentimes looks amazing from the outside perspective in, but on the inside perspective of the leaders, and especially the pastor, it can be horrible. That's a lot of times where pastors have moral failures, pastors commit suicide, all these kind of things happen. And on the outside, you're like, why would they do that? It looks amazing. On the inside, they are a duck on a pond running. Now, if they can get past that, they go into what's called systemic growth. And during that phase, it'll slow down a little bit, and we're kind of there now as a church. But point is, go through this season. I never really thought much about it. There's certain things I've always just kind of known, but I don't really process them. I guess all of us are that way to one degree or another. And so we go on our sabbatical, our first ever sabbatical, and our sabbatical started with a prayer retreat for me. 4 times a year I go away, just me and my Bible on a prayer retreat. That's actually what I'll be next week. And that really casts a lot of vision for our church and hearing from God and such. And I go away to start the sabbatical. I go on away to a prayer retreat, just me and God. And during that prayer retreat, I have this moment with God, where I realize that I never anticipated growing old. Now, this is a bizarre thing to many people. And my wife might throw stuff at me because she doesn't like when I talk about this kind of stuff. But in my mind, I run at a high pace. It's okay if I die. Like, you know what I mean? It's not that I want to die today. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, am I ever going to be 95? Probably not. You know, I'm probably, because I just run at a pace that, like, I'm going to burn out relatively faster than other people and blah, blah, blah. And that's okay. Never really thought much of it. And I had this whole conversation with God, like, do you want to grow old? And I came away from the sabbatical going, yeah, you know, I think I do, actually. Not for myself, but for the sake of other people. You know, for the sake of the kingdom of God, I think I would like to grow old. And I didn't. It was an interesting conversation if you were there with me and God in the moment. And coming out of that, we go on sabbatical. It's awesome. We chill out for 9.5 weeks, essentially 9 weeks after that time, and come home, and we come right back to preaching, right? So we're gone all this time. Stress is gone. It's amazing. We're back. Everything you think it's supposed to be. Get back from that, and probably the first 2 weeks back in, 3 weeks, something like that, start having these weird chest pains. Well, that's weird. Now we're like, this is 2019, so this is way before my heart attack. That's January 2021. But 2019, towards the end of 2019, I started having these chest pains, and I'm not one, like probably most guys are this way. I'm not going to tell a lot of people this stuff. So there's just a few people that knew. Some of my closer friends, and I would go to them and I'm like, hey, you just pray with me about this. I don't know what it is. It's kind of weird. It felt like somebody was grabbing my heart. It felt like, and the first time it happened was a Sunday morning. I'm preaching, and I'm feeling this happening as I'm preaching. You'd never know, but that's what's going on in my mind. And I remember walking out that morning when it was over, and I think it was Tony Parker, and I was talking to Tony, and I'm like, hey, I don't know what this is, but pray with me. Because it's my heart, it's like, should I have this checked out? It's not like it's a twitch in my arm, you know, it's like, it's my heart. Long story short, that started the process of going to doctor after doctor after doctor, trying to figure out what's going on. Long story short, months later, because it took a long time to figure it out, but sometime around March or something of 2020, they finally diagnosed me with a stress-induced cardiomyopathy, they call it, which basically means that you spend a lot of time under a lot of stress, and when that happens, your arteries tighten up a little bit because of the stress. And then what happens is actually whenever it opens up, and then what happens is when you are not under stress and you're actually very relaxed, it closes back up, and you're not getting enough blood to your heart. So it's a weird thing that your heart hurts when you're not stressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's part of the weirdness of all this going on. Ada's walking me through it and all that at the time too, and so we're like, oh wow, okay. Well, when they did that, they test for all this blockage and blah blah blah, and I had a small amount of blockage, but it wasn't anything to be concerned with. They're testing all that stuff, and they're like, yeah, you don't have to worry about that, but you need less stress. And we're like, yeah, how do you do that exactly? That's what I do. And so the doctors are saying that, and in 2020 ended up, and I don't have to go into a lot of detail about this, but if you even take COVID out of the scenario, it was the hardest year of my life, of Ada's life. 2020 was horrible. We fought all kinds of personal things, not like in our marriage. In fact, I came out of 2020, I think she would agree, going, our marriage is strong, and we proved it by 2020. Fought things with just family things all around. It was that alone. And then you had COVID on top of it, and leading the church through COVID. There was a lot going on behind the scenes that we never talked about in the church for obvious reasons. It just wasn't anybody's business. So during all that, I'm having these heart palpitations at the same time and trying not to be stressed in this extra stressful situation. And so they gave me nitroglycerin pills for that. So fast forward, 2020, stressful year. We finally break out of 2020. I'm a huge college football fan. Alabama and Florida State are my two kind of favorite teams, and Alabama's in the national championship on a Monday because that happens pretty much every year. And the Sunday prior to that, Sunday morning, or actually really going all the way to Saturday, I started feeling the same kind of thing in my chest, but it was different. But I assumed it's the same stuff, right? Whatever. This has been on and off, on and off, on and off. It was just, you almost kind of get used to it. And so Sunday morning, it actually was fairly strong Sunday morning. I'm preaching, which is now my claim to fame that I preach having a heart attack. Paul can be like, I got stoned for Jesus. I'm like, I preach having a heart attack. Take that, Pastor. So, I'm having these things, and I went to a couple people on Sunday morning, a couple of the guys. I'm like, hey, just FYI, this is going on. I don't know what this is, but it's a little different, and it's stronger than usual and different. I had been a little bit sick, and I had noticed, the only thing that I could really say that was a sign is, like, I remember getting on the treadmill one day, and I couldn't hardly go, like, hardly at all. I'm like, that's weird, but I've been sick, and I thought, well, I was just been sick, Long story short, Sunday, it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse and worse. Monday, it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And as a typical guy, Monday night, Alabama's playing in the national championship, and I'm like, I am not missing this game. We are going to win, and we did. And I laid on the couch, and by this point, it felt like my rib cage was rubbing against my heart. Now, what I found out later was that there's a sac around your heart that when it gets inflated, it really does. That is exactly what's happening. It's rubbing it, and it's very painful. And it makes it hard to breathe, and it's just, every time you move, you feel it, because your ribcage moves. And it kept getting worse and worse and worse. And my wife, Ada, thought I had gallbladder. She was convinced I had a gallbladder issue. And so she had me drinking apple cider vinegar, large amounts of apple cider vinegar. It was horrible. For 2 days straight.
Forgave me for that. That's so huge.
So I'm drinking all this apple cider vinegar and watching this football game, and it was that night during the game that it just got progressively worse to the point that I couldn't hardly sit up. And I'm laying on the couch watching this game, and that's where we kind of thought, all right, this might be more serious. And I went to bed, and we said, all right, if it's still like this in the morning, then I'll go to the hospital because this is just weird. And I'm still thinking it's connected to the other thing, or I'm convinced it's my gallbladder. I'm like, and both me and Ada are like, you go to the hospital, they're going to take it out, so you fix it before you go, All right, so we probably laid down for maybe 30 minutes or so, maybe an hour, I don't know. I laid there, and I just couldn't breathe. And I'm like, all right, I should probably go to the hospital. As all the men in the room know, that's a big deal because we just simply don't go to the hospital. So I'm like, all right, this must be pretty serious. We need to go. And that was a tough ride because Ada's driving, and every bump on the road you could feel it. And it just hurt. Get to the hospital, and by God's sovereign plan, there's not a single person in the emergency room in Brent Hospital. Anybody ever seen that?
No.
Not a single person. On national championship night where everybody's drunk and not a single person, anyway. And so, they take me in, they and so it's a heart thing. So they run over and they plug me into this monitor and check it out. And that was the first time that it seemed to be more serious because I'm still at this point thinking it's gallbladder. I'm like, And so the nurse checked me all out. She's talking to the doctor on the phone. You could tell as she's talking to the doctor, they're saying, bring me right back kind of thing. And maybe the most valuable information I got from any nurse the entire time, we're in this little wheelchair. It's not a wheelchair, but it is a wheelchair, but it's not a normal wheelchair that they put you in, they start taking you back. And she leans down and she whispers in my ear. She goes, it's about to get really hectic. Just answer any questions they ask and go, just go with the flow, whatever. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? She said, they think you're having a heart attack. And I'm thinking, I ain't having a heart attack. What are you talking about having a heart attack? I was having my heart checked for blockage like 6 months ago or whatever. Like I don't have, no more than a normal person my age, whatever. So they go in and they immediately start asking like tons of questions. Thank God Ada was there to answer some of them, and I was there and they're asking both of us and all that. And rushed me back into a room with the doctor. Doctor says, listen, you're having a heart attack. As he's saying the words, I'm like, you're crazy. No, I'm not. Like, you're just trying to make money off me. That's what my cynical mind works. And he says, you have I think it was 95% blockage, wasn't it? 95% blockage. And I'm like, I don't have 95% blockage. They check my blockage. Now, I will say I found out later, talking to another heart doctor, that what can happen is, you have plaque on your walls of your arteries. At any time, that plaque can break off. What causes that? Stress. At any time, it can break off, and when your arteries are dilating, it affects it too. So it can break off, and then it creates a jam, and all of a sudden you go from 20% to 95%, just like that, which is apparently what happened with me. So that's all a crazy moment. At that point, I'm also freezing. It was really cold that night, and they're stripping me down on this platform thing that's like metal, and it's freezing. I was already shaking prior to it, and shaking hurt too because of the chest thing. So I'm shaking. And they're stripping me down in the whole 9 yards, and they're like, we're gonna put 2 stents in. I'm like, okay. And they did all that procedure. It felt like 3 minutes. I don't know. It was crazy fast. And they're done, and I never felt a thing. Like, and maybe it's partially because I was shaking and partially because I was hurting here, but I literally never felt it cut me or anything. So they do all that. Finally, I was sitting there shaking. I'm like, I'm freezing. And the nurse is like, are you cold? I'm like, yes. So she brought a warm blanket. Probably charged me $600 for it, but she brought me a warm blanket. Anybody ever been to the hospital? And so they brought me the blanket, and they take me to the ICU, where I spent a day and a half or so before I got out of there. And it's in the ICU that I kind of have this realization, and talking to the doctors and nurses coming in, that I could have just died. I'll be perfectly honest, I never thought I was going to die. I would have been the one that died, and I'm like, what God? Huh? It's fine. No, God, I don't have blockage. The doctor told me. Yeah, it's all in the room. That's what we do. So I never really in the moment thought I was going to die. Literally, when he's telling me I got 95% blockage, my mind is thinking, you're lying. No, I don't. But you're the doctor, so what can I argue with you, And it's during those moments in the hospital that I'm laying there, and it starts coming to this realization, well, I could have just died. This is where the story is probably different than what most people expect. Because I'm laying there in the hospital bed, and over and over and over, I kept hearing this verse in my head. You can turn there if you want. It's Philippians chapter 1. Philippians 1, beginning in verse 21, we'll read to 25. It was really the first verse that kept going through my head. More than likely, if you've been around church long, you know this verse. But Paul's writing, he's writing from a Roman jail, more than likely. He doesn't know if he's going to survive this time. He's already been stoned to death once before, and they brought him back to life. He's already been persecuted repeatedly. He just doesn't know what the future holds for him. And so he's writing to this church in Philippi, and it's out of that mindset that he says, verse 21, "For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain." For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I'm going to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. Think about that. I am torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far. But it is more necessary for you that I remain in the body. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain and I will continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith. You can keep reading, but I'll stop there. I want to turn this into something because I don't want to sound hyper spiritual because I'm really not. 8 is the spiritual one. But laying in that room, knowing I could have just died, knowing it's still, at that point I'm in ICU, it's still relatively serious, they're seeing how everything went. Okay, if I go to heaven, go to heaven. And that's such a different perspective than what we have most of the time as Americans. I'll be really, really honest. What affected me the most is when Ada said that the boys were crying when they found out I had a heart attack, my sons. If you know Ty doesn't cry at anything. Ty's a man's man, John Wayne, tough guy, And she said, Ty, I don't like to cry.
Sorry.
That affected me because I thought, okay, I don't want to be selfish, but so this is affecting them. But as far as I'm concerned, to live is Christ, to die is gain. And we find ourselves in these pathways. And Paul says this thing, saying, if I stay, it's for fruitful labor. In other words, if I stay, it's not for me any longer. It's always for you, which is what he continues on saying right here. It's better for you if I stay. Right? And that's not me taking it. That's Paul saying. I'm not quite that arrogant. And coming out of that, I had, obviously time off, and they wouldn't let me come to work. And so I had all this time, and I'm processing it. That verse just over and over and over. To live is Christ, to die is gain. To live is Christ, to die is gain. And I came to this realization that was probably there prior, but I had never mentally processed it. That I have accomplished far more. Accomplished might not be the right word. I've done far more than most people ever do in their lifetime. I don't say that with arrogance, but through the Lord's blessing, I have ministered in dozens and dozens and dozens of countries. Ralph's probably been with me in a dozen of them, close. But through God's grace, I've led people to Jesus on 5 of the 7 continents. I've written books. I've earned degrees. I have loved one woman with all of my heart. I have help create these amazing kids that, they need me, but I think they're capable of surviving without me. I've led a ministry that's grown and blossomed and been beautiful, and I've empowered so many, and this is not me being prideful, I'm just saying this is what's going through my head. I've empowered so many other churches and helped so many churches, and so many ministers are in ministry today because I either empowered them in the beginning or I kept them when they would have quit or things. And that's not pride, it's just the truth. I still do. I did it today for hours today. It's what I do, and so I'm like I've kind of done more than most people were doing their whole life. God has blessed me in this tremendous way. What else do I have to live for? Like, people tend to think, I want to do this or I want to do that, or it's like, what's the country song? Live like you're dying. Go ride a bull, go whatever. And that people tend to think that way. I'm like, anything that I would have ever said I wanted to do, I've done. And there was a time in my life where if I was invited to minister in, Cuba, then if I'm being honest, I would have said yes, and it would have been for the glory of God, but there was also a part of me that's like, that's so cool, I get to go to Cuba, I'm going to go to Cuba. When you've traveled the world, all of a sudden you start being like, I don't really care about going to another country. As cool as the country might be, it's kind of fun to see the experience, but I don't. So it's like, I don't, And so what begins to happen is you're truly not living for yourself. There was a part of you that, yeah, you did ministry, but it was also just fun. It's like cool to go to these places and experience this. But then there comes this maturity that comes and goes, all right, I don't have to ever do that again. It's about the people. It's about the ministry. It's about fruitful labor. Isn't that what Paul said? And so that my life is no longer about me. It's about others. Now, I'm not going to act like I don't care about my life and I don't have desires or whatever, because I do. But the truth is, and I think I came to this realization, is that I had started dying to myself so many years ago that whenever I actually faced physical death, it was nothing to me. And this is why I say it's not what people probably expected to hear. But I think that's the Christian story. I think that's what it should be like. And so by the time I face actual death, it's like I've been dying to myself for a long time. Now, I'm not perfect at it by no means. But even coming out of it, it's like, I don't minister on the stage on Sunday morning so that people applaud me. Maybe there was a time in my life where I appreciated that more. And I know I'm not that old, but I've just reached an age and near-death experience and whatever that I don't care if you applaud anymore. You know what I mean? Don't get me wrong. I appreciate that we're in it together and that kind of thing, but I'm living for you. I'm living because my boys were crying. Because it would affect them so much. So I want to be there for them. I want to be there for my wife because I'm sure she was crying too. I want to be there for other people. And so your life actually becomes not about you. Now this is partially just adulthood, right? All of us. But it's the realization that you find with death with that it's not about you. It's always about them. And everything you do now is about who you're ministering to, whether that be in a church service ministry or whether that be in you're ministering to your kid by raising them up. And so that's kind of where I came out of it, thinking of that way. And it's really stuck with me still to this day. Again, I don't think it radically changed how I was living, but it changed the way I thought about how I was living. And that's why we want to create galaxies, not stars. That's the Christian ethic. So with that, we live in an America that's considered postmodern. It's what's referred to as a secular humanistic culture. And we grow up in it. It's the air we breathe. You can't help but be intoxicated by it because it's everywhere. So the secular humanistic worldview, the way they view things is that it's always working towards a utopia. It's progress. We're always getting better. And in general, there's a lot of truth to that sometimes. The world is getting, as much as we complain, when you look at least engineering and science and technology and cities, oftentimes they really are getting better. And so there's a utopia out here that we're all reaching for, and we're all going to get there together, and science becomes the religion that's going to get us there, and all of this. And within the secular humanistic worldview, which is the common way of thinking in America, it is the least able to handle difficulty. Because we're always going to good. It's always going to good. But what happens when it's not? When it's not good? That worldview doesn't know how to handle it. We freak out. We lose our minds. Because it's always supposed to get better, better, better. And then something bad happens, I don't know how to deal with it. Notice across America right now, if something bad happens to us, we're running to counselors and things way more because we don't know how to handle it. Our worldview never taught us how to handle it. So watch what happens, and this is not political, but watch what happens with COVID. All of a sudden, there's a fear of death that is irrational. There's a rational fear of death, but there's also an irrational fear of death. If a snake comes and slithers up to me, I am smart enough to run away from the snake or get away from the snake. But if I'm still running 2 miles from now, no longer is that a rational fear, it just became irrational. So there's a respect for something, but then if we're not careful, we actually are starting to respond out of a fear of death. In the ancient world, Christians, oftentimes, this was actually a problem in the early church. Christians would put themselves purposely in situations to be martyred. I don't know if you know this or not. It wasn't healthy, it wasn't right. But Jesus was crucified. I want to be like Jesus. So I'm going to purposely put myself into a situation where I'm going to be martyred. In the early first few hundred years of Christianity, that was a fairly common thing. That obviously wasn't healthy. But look how far we've come on the other side of this now, 2,000 years later. That they wanted to be killed because to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. They wanted to be killed. Now we find ourselves in a place where we are scared to death of death. And we will do anything to avoid death. Neither one of those are healthy. And yet Christians are typically responding the same way as unbelievers with this stuff. Here's, I'm smart now because I'm getting a doctorate, and all the research in the world will tell you statistically there is a 100% chance that you die. I'm just pointing out, I'm smart now, it's my doctorate coming out of me, and just quoting statistics off the top of my head, but well researched, 100% chance that you die. Not only that you will die, but that everybody you know will also die. Yet we seem to live a life that assumes that's not going to happen. And so when it does happen, we lose our minds. Are you with me?
Yeah.
In the cultural world that we live in with secular humanism, I get it. In the Christian sense, we got to be better than that. We got to be better. And I'm not saying that you celebrate every death. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying like, praise God, Granny died. No. But there is this difference in the way we mourn.
Yes.
To live as Christ, to die is gain. You actually gain when you die. Your temporary house to a permanent house. Your distant relationship with Jesus to a close relationship with Jesus. The kingdom in all of its fullness. You actually gain a lot when you die. It is not a sad thing. It is a joyous thing. Now, I jokingly say this, and I've actually preached this and we tease about it. You're going to cry at my funeral because I'm going to mean something to you. Right? Because I want my life to be imparting into others, and I want people to go, oh my gosh. D.L. Moody once said, he said, one day you will hear, I'm butchering this in my own, it's not word for word, but he said, one day you will hear that D.L. Moody died. He said, when you hear that, don't believe it. He said, D.L. Moody is now fully alive. So good. We've got to be people that while we might mourn for a moment, because we will miss them physically for a season, that we actually see the beauty of heaven. And what happens is, back in the day, if you're older, you remember we used to sing all those hymns about heaven. Some glad morning, all these hymns. I got a mansion just over the hilltop. Like there were a million hymns about heaven. You know why? Because when life is hard, you look forward to heaven. And for many in that generation, and the hymn writers, life was hard. So you're looking forward to heaven. You're singing about it. What's happened is life got good. It got easy. It got nice. And now all of a sudden when life is good, I don't look forward to heaven because I enjoy life. And what happens is we start to love life more than we love heaven. And we just have to be so careful of this. Because as Christians, this is one of the areas that we should stand out like a city on a hill. We should shine a light. That when everybody else is in fear of death, we are not in fear of death.
Amen.
It might be natural to fear dying, but as a Christian, it's not natural to fear death. It's actually something, believe it or not, that we can look forward to. Again, not that we're suicidal, we're not all trying to die. Don't purposely put yourself in a position to be martyred. That's not. But to be absent with the body, to be present with the Lord. To live as Christ and to die is gain. And as long as I'm on this earth, I am going to be investing in other people because my life is already dead. And I'm living for other people. And if we can get that right in this moment of COVID across the United States, we will stand out. It will be beautiful. And by and large, it doesn't look like the church gets it right. We've forgotten that heaven is a real place.
That's right.
But that's kind of what that was my story. That's what I got out of my heart attack. It reinforced something that I really already knew, but it taught me that it was true. I am not scared of death. I'm not going to go jump off a building, but I am not scared of death. And I think as Christians, that's got to be something that marks us different than everybody else. All right, let me end with this just biblical point. Back to the Bible study. For to me to live is Christ and to die is gain. If I go on living in the body, then this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. Listen to this next line. I am torn between the two. I am torn between the two. Here's what I believe. Every one of us as Christians should live in a tension between the two. God, I want to be with you. Jesus, I want to be with you. But you're using me here. People need me here. I need to be used in my workplace, in my community, in my family. I need to be used here. And if I asked you the question, if you died tomorrow, would you be okay with it or whatever? I think it begs this tension that if you respond quickly either way, yeah, I want to go to heaven. Yeah, but there should be a tension dragging you here to earth. Or, no, I don't want to go to heaven. I want to be here. There should be a tension dragging you to heaven. I think as Christians, we should live in that tension between the two. And I think Paul was living in that tension between the two. That I eagerly desire to go to heaven, but I know God is using me here on earth, and I want to stay here for your benefit. Whoever that your is, for your benefit. But don't miss me so much when I'm gone, because you'll see me before we know it.
Amen.
All right, let's pray. Jesus, God, I pray that, especially in this time and season in America, Lord, that we would stand out like a city on a hill, because we are not frantic, we are not fearful, we are wise, and we want to make smart decisions and take care of our neighbor and all of that. But we will not walk in fear of death. We will walk in a longing for heaven, a desire for your presence, a desire for more of you. And I pray that every one of us would live in that tension between longing for heaven and also longing to be used by you here on earth in fruitful ministry. I hope you enjoyed this conversation today, and I especially hope it added value to you. If you enjoyed it, would you do me a favor and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast provider? It really helps to get the word out. And of course, if you share this content with your friends, that would be great too. And until next time, I hope you continue creating a better future. I look forward to being with you again soon.